Good evening. Welcome to the Distinguished Speakers Series at Bernathen College of the New Church. I am Dr. Dan Senesvet, Associate Professor of Philosophy at the college, and it is my honor to introduce tonight's speaker to you. Justin Stroh graduated from ANC in 1973. After a couple of years off from school, he attended Montgomery County Community College, New York University, and then graduated from Penn State University with a degree in chemistry. He then earned a PhD in chemistry from the University of Illinois in 1986. A short 3 days later, that same year, Dr. Stroh started his career at Pfizer Pharmaceuticals in Connecticut, running the Analytical Development Mass Spectrometry Lab. While in this position, he worked on various projects, including Zithromax, the first once-day antibiotic, and Zoloft, an SSRI antidepressant. He moved from analytical development into drug discovery research in 1991, starting Pfizer's first protein mass spectrometry lab. In 2005, he moved to Wyeth Pharmaceuticals in suburban Philadelphia, where he ran a discovery research mass spectrometry lab and developed the first practical automated accurate mass system for drug discovery purposes. After Wyeth merged with Pfizer, he returned to Pfizer's Connecticut location in 2010, where he led the same mass spectrometry facility he had started. Now overseeing the lab, his work included the development of mass spectrometry imaging for drugs in the discovery process, developing a complete mass spectrometry system for screening drug targets, and developing the practical use of mass spectrometry for observing protein-to-protein interactions in the drug discovery process. In 2017, he began working for Eurofin's Lancaster Labs, where he oversees the company's mass spectrometry facilities for its various pharmaceutical testing departments. In addition to these professional achievements, Dr. Stroh and his wife Bess are the parents of two daughters, Virginia and Kingsley. Upon retirement, he intends to publish books on the intersection of science and theology. To tell you more about his exploration in this field and explain what mass spectrometry is, please join me in welcoming Dr. Justin Stroh to the college this evening.
Thanks, Dan. Thank you, Dan, for that nice introduction. And you can all hear me? This okay. All right. So what I have to talk about tonight is something that maybe you know something about, maybe not anything about, is this rise of the religious nuns, people who are leaving organized religion, specifically in the United States, and how that relates with science. And to do that, I'm going to talk about, if I can get, oops, it's not on. See? I'm going to talk about these two things. There's science and religion. And these are two things that are actually really, really sort of important to me. So I need to give you a 3-slide introduction of where I'm actually coming from in order for it to make sense to you folks why I'm saying what I'm saying. All right? And this is where we're going to start. So I'll start with the religion. I grew up here. I went through the high school. I took all the religion courses that everybody else takes. Very critically, my father was a minister in this town, so as you might expect, religion played a real big deal in my house when I was growing up. And I moved away, but I continue reading, And the whole time from there to here, I never saw any reason to want to renounce what I had learned, so I have not. I just continue on with it. So I have this affinity for religion on the one hand, and you'll hear about that. My relationship with science is completely different. The entire time I was growing up, I never once heard either my mother or my father say boo to me about science. It wasn't like, you're not allowed to talk about that in this house. It was a non-subject. I never heard anything relating to science. And you might say, well, that was bad, but I think it was actually very good, because I didn't learn anything about science at home, but I also very critically never learned that science was a bad thing. Or that, science was something you don't do that if you're going to be involved with, interest in religion. And that really came into play later in life. I had problems with science in high school, really bad problems, but those were all internal. And I had to deal with those personally, and I did. I ended up becoming a scientist. I mean, that's what I do for a living, is science. So it's not like it could have been that bad. But, so that's where I'm coming from on that. So I see these two things. And, so when we talk, or when I talk with other people, and someone comes up to me and says, you know what, I really like religion, but, science is for the birds. I'm okay with that. We'll talk about religion. Or if you come up and say, science is just the cat's meow, but, religion's for the birds. I'm okay. We'll talk about science. And even if you come up to me and say, you know what, science and religion, they're both nuts, I'm still okay. I'm not sure what we're going to talk about, but we'll find something. There's only one thing that really bugs me, and that's when somebody says, you know what, in order to actively choose one of these two things, you must in fact renounce the other. That just drives me around the bend. And the reason is, it's because I love them both. Now you're telling me I'm not allowed to have that which I love. I love both of them. And that's the only thing that bugs me. So just be aware of that. Okay, so that's where I'm coming from. All right, having said that, here's another thing. There's a question I get asked. It says, Justin, how is it you come to believe in a God? You're a scientist. A lot of scientists are atheists. That's true. Evidently, you're not an atheist. Why not? What's this business about you believing in a God? It's an honest question. Because it's an honest question, it deserves an honest answer. So I'm going to tell you. So, I'm a mass spectrometrist. I've been doing mass spectrometry for 40-some years now. And what is mass spec? So mass spec is this thing where you take little white powders and you put them in a machine. And in the machine, you create an ion. You either add or subtract one or more electrons or protons. You create an unbalanced charge. Now that you've got an unbalanced charge called an ion, you bend that thing around through electric and magnetic fields. Depending on what that path takes for that molecule, tells you about the molecular weight of that compound. If you measure the molecular weight of that compound accurately enough, you can get this thing called an elemental composition out, which is basically, here this compound has 20 carbons, 14 hydrogens, 2 nitrogens, and oxygen, blah, 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 like that. Right? So you put this thing in the instrument and you can find out what the elemental composition is. Then you start whacking it and it falls apart. Those are called fragments. And you look at the fragments. The fragments were like, you lost 42, that must have been an acetate. You lose 15, a methyl. Lose 18, it's a water that came from an alcohol, blah, 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 blah. You got all these little pieces. And then you sit down with a piece of paper and a pencil, and you start drawing chemical structures. And you say, okay, it's got to have this, and it's got to have that, because that's what the data says. And you stitch it all back together. And you do that by pushing electrons around. So you say, okay, here's this structure, and I'm going to pull this thing off here, and that means the electrons go over there, and like that. And in the end, you've got a chemical structure. Ta-da! That's how it works. That's called structural elucidation. All right? There's just one tiny little issue with this, and that is, I've never actually seen an electron. And that would be okay. So you believe in something you've never seen. Yeah, it's true. It's true. But it gets worse. Turns out nobody else has ever seen an electron either. Oh, wait a minute. So you believe in something you've never seen and nobody else has ever seen. Yeah, it's true. I don't. But it gets worse. Turns out, this guy, in the beginning of the earlier part of the 20th century, demonstrates on first principles that nobody's ever going to see an electron. Oh, you believe in something you've never seen, nobody else has ever seen, nobody's ever going to see. Sounds like a religion to me. It's not. I guarantee it's not a religion, but it sounds like one. So the real question is, why do I believe in electrons? I do believe in electrons. The answer is simple. When I look at chemistry through the lens of atomic theory, chemistry in general, and mass spectrometry in particular, makes a whole pile of sense to me. Does that prove beyond all doubt that electrons exist? No. It simply means when I look through that lens, things add up. For me, therefore, I continue to look through that lens. So, why do you believe in a God? Pretty much the same reason. When I look through the lens of New Church theology, my life in particular, the life of my loved ones more generally, and life in general makes a whole pile of sense to me. Does that prove beyond all doubt that God exists? No. It simply means when I look through the lens, things add up. Therefore, I continue to look through that lens. And that's really all I have to say on that subject. Next slide. All right. So, this is the last slide. I'm sorry I'm dragging you through this, but I have to. So, I got onto Facebook late in life after everybody else. I'm off it now. I have no social platform at all. I mean, I've just none. I hate it. It's really toxic. But I was late to the game. But I get on, and I say, okay, fine. I'm starting to go around meeting my old buddies. Say, okay, hi, how have you been? And, how you have, like, on Facebook, you have a page or a board or a wall or something like that where you can write things and other people can see it. So this is a person who is a stranger to me. I'm talking to a friend, and there's this third person who I don't know who they are, and so it's the stranger, and he's writing, or she is writing on this page, scientists say that there's no God. What? Where does that come from? I have two major issues with this statement. First is, who gives a hoot what scientists say about God? If that had said, violinists think there is no God, what would you think? It's just like, so what? They're not related, but people tend to think they are. That's my first issue. The second one is the word scientist, that noun, is completely unmodified. There's no adjective. It doesn't say most scientists. It doesn't say scientists I know. It doesn't say, the really neat scientists. It just says scientists. And you could deduce from that must mean all scientists say there is no God. And that's rubbish. Okay, so this made me start thinking. It's like, where's this coming from? Why would you say such a thing? So I started reading books from people I'd never heard of before. People like Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, Jerry Coyne. These are people who are famous atheists who happen to be scientists. They're real scientists, but they're actually famous atheists who happen to be scientists. I personally know many famous scientists who happen to be atheists, and that's different than famous atheists who happen to be scientists, and that's where this came from. It's like, okay, if you read these folks, I see how you can get the idea that, scientists say there is no God, because that's really the message that comes across, and that just really bugged me. Because it's like, no, that's not true. That's just, there are plenty of atheist scientists. I know plenty of atheist scientists. That's okay. But that doesn't hold that, scientists say there's no God. And that's what's driven me to want to do, when in retirement, to write books, because I am a scientist. I know what science is about. And maybe you believe in God, and maybe you don't, and that's okay. But the idea that if you're going to be in the sciences, you must be an atheist, that's like really bad. No. And that's what I want to write about eventually. That's where I'm coming from. I'm sorry I dragged you through all of this. It's all personal stuff. However, there's a reason for this. The reason is this. What I'm going to talk about is about people leaving organized religion and how it relates to science. And I get that it could very well be that some people in the room and some people online might view me as the enemy. And what I'm really trying to do before we get off the ground here is to show you where I'm coming from and give you an idea that even though I might look like your enemy, the truth is I'm on the same side you are. Just don't forget that, please. I really am on your side. So, but, whoops, I went off. I am fine? Okay. Where I'm coming from is that at the end there's good news. But we're going to have to issues to get there, right? So I'm a scientist, so what I'm going to show you is data heavy because that's what scientists do. So please buckle up your seats and away we go. Okay, this is where we're going to start. This is a plot. This comes from, you can't read it. I can just barely read it down here. This comes from the General Social Survey. Who are they? These are people, this comes out of the University of Chicago. People who are sociologists know all about this kind of organization. It's like a consortium or something. And it comes out of University of Chicago and is supported by the National Science Foundation. It's a real honest-to-goodness polling system. They just ask people things like, what's your religion? Right? And they plot this out as a function a year. And you can't really see any of this, and that's okay. For you. And the thing is, if you look up here, there's over on the far right at the bottom, that's 1972, that's where it starts, and it goes all the way over to 2018. And it's on the y-axis is the percentage of the American population that says yay or nay to a particular thing. And we have plotted out here the Jewish population, black Protestants, mainline Protestants, evangelical Protestants, Catholics. The only one I want to point out is that orangey line. This guy. That guy. That's the nuns. Those are the no religion people. As of 2018, they were bigger as a constituency in the United States than any other particular sect. They were larger than Catholics in this country. They were larger than evangelicals. They were larger than anyone. Who are these people? And look what's happening. On the far left side is, when I'm getting out of high school, it's around 1972, 73. It's about 5% of the population is no religion. And that sort of flat goes up and down a little bit, 5, 6, 7, 6, 5, to get to an inflection point in 1991. And all of a sudden it takes off like a rocket. Just look at it. It's zip, up it goes. And, this is generational. It's just moved over the last 30 years. It's just gone and gone and gone and gone and gone. And it's not at its end. You can't write this off as just, there's this bunch of kids, they'll get married, they'll have kids, they'll come back to the fold, as it were. There's too many people leaving. You can't add it up that way. So there's a lot of people that are just leaving. So we got to dig in what is going on, right? And that's what I'm going to do. That's the first set of data. Now notice everything else I'm going to show you is up from the high part of this graph up here. It's from 2014 up through 2018. That's as good as I could do. This is all publicly available data. This is not hidden anywhere behind paywalls. Anyone can get at this. Right? You just got to Google it, and it's right out in the open. Right? So the next thing is, okay, so who are these people, these nuns, these no religious? Okay, here's another way of looking at it. This bit of data was collected in, where does it say? 2016. Okay, so we're at the high part of that graph. And this is a layout, these columns are age groups. So on the far right, we have the 65 and older crowd. That's like, yay, that's me. And all the way at the other end, on the left-hand side, you have the millennials. And then you have the other folks in between. And then you have color coding for what's your religion? Are you evangelical? Are you this, that, or the other thing? Right? And I'm going to read it to you because I know you can't read it. So on the far right, where I am, at age 65 and older group, 26% of my cohorts are white evangelical Protestants. Okay, that's pretty good. 19% are white mainland Protestants, and you like this. When you look down to the left, just look at the color coding, like the dark blue. That's the evangelicals across the board. So in my cohort, they're, what did I say, 26%. By the time you get to the millennials, they're 6%. They're falling apart. I mean, they look at evangelicals and say, oh, they're doing real well. You can't sustain that. You lost the whole generation of white evangelicals. You look at the next one up is the white mainline Protestants. They start in my group, 19%. By the time you get to millennials, they're 8%. Next one up from them, the light blues, those are the white Catholics. 16% in my group. By the time millennials, 6%. Now these greenish type things, those are the black Protestants, the Latino Protestants, and the Latino Catholics. They're pretty much flat across the board. But where are all these white Catholics going? They're going to the purple. Okay, generation, it's 12%. By the time you get to the millennials, 38%. That's not sustainable. And basically this says the United States has lost a generation of people going to church. Done. And they're not coming back. Because the numbers won't work to make them come back. And the generation coming behind them looks worse. What's going on? But what's the function of this? Next bit of data. All right, this is Pew Research. Pew Research is high quality information. So this, unfortunately, is all the way back from 2014. It's the best I could do. That's publicly available. But what I want to point out is ask, composition of the religiousness. Who are these people? Well, it turns out that as of 2014, which is not 2020, but it's the best there is right now, 13% of this cohort is atheist. Those are, there is no God. Go away. Leave me alone. Another 17% is agnostic. So maybe this man. That only adds up to 31%. Most of the people that are leaving religion are in this group. Right, just circling red. Those are the nothing in particular. 69% of the people leaving churches are not atheists. They're not even agnostics. They're nothing in particular. They're broken up into religion is not important or religion is important, but they're still just nothing in particular. So who are these people? Why are they leaving? What are they thinking about? Dig deeper. So it turns out, Pew does. This is another poll, actually just before the last general election. Okay, so and they break out. So, asking people on the way out the door, why are you leaving? What's going on? And they give a bunch of bullets, and they say one of them is, you just don't believe. Another one is, don't like organized religion, religiously unsure, or just an inactive believer, or something else. Now, they have all these columns, which you can't see. There's the columns for the atheists, there's columns for the agnostics, both of which are a small subset of the people who are actually leaving. The big numbers, of course, are the nothing in particular. Why are they leaving? Well, you look at that, and you find that here, the biggest reason is because they don't believe. Would you please be a little more specific? The don't believe category, they give you subcategories. One of them is you're just, what was the word there again? You're disenchanted, or you're not interested, or your views have evolved, or you went through a crisis of faith. A crisis accounts for exactly 1% of these people. That's not. People aren't having a crisis of faith. Why are they leaving? They're disenchanted. Why are they disenchanted? Why are they doing this? Dig deeper. They actually get down to actual text. And they give you 7 different textual reasons why people are leaving. And first on the list is, I went to college and learned about evolution. That's first on the list. There's 7 bullets there. 3 of them have to do with science. And the top one is I went to college and I learned about evolution. You can't make these numbers add up by just saying, well, this is just, that's just the biblical literalists. They're having a problem with Adam. You can't make that add up. There's not enough people doing that to come up with these numbers. It's coming from all kinds of places. Well, that's what I'm going to talk about. And that's what's probably going to bug a couple people. Just remember, I'm on your side. Right? Just remember that, please. Okay, so why are people... When I looked at that, I said, you leave organized religion, and the reason is because you went to college and learned about evolution. That should be a non sequitur, and it's not. That's the reason. It's one of many reasons. I mean, it's not like there's not a... Number 2 on that list was Christian hypocrisy, and this was done before the last general election, so maybe it flipped. I don't know. And I'm not qualified to talk about that. That's not up my alley. But 3 of them are science. And I went to college and learned about evolution. That should be like, what difference does that make? But it does make a difference. And that's what I need to talk about. And I'm going to start here. You'll notice this statement is in quotes. It's because it was actually spoken to me. It was spoken to me way long time ago, back when I was in high school. There was a teacher, and he said this in class, and it was not it wasn't the subject of the class, it wasn't a religion class, but it still came out. And when I heard this statement, I was just floored. I mean, as I said previously, I was having issues with science in high school, but I thought this was really, really profound. I said, and I thought at the time, this is something you have to be involved in New Church theology in order to get. Nobody else knows about this. It's just only in New Church theology. Boy, was I wrong. But let's read it, because there's a catch in here. It says, religion and science do not conflict when both are properly understood. There's a couple of escape. But I thought this was like, wow, this is amazing. Turns out this is ridiculously generic when it comes to Christian systems. A lot of Christians argue this very point. And it's making this not work right, this actual statement, that leads to a lot of problems. When you think about this. I was talking to an evangelical person not too long ago who gave this demonstration, and it's really true. It's really true. When you take a religious person and you say, okay, I have this bit of theology, it doesn't matter what it is, I have this bit of theology in this hand, and I've built my worldview around part of that, and I have this little bit, some bit of science in this other hand, and I can see, plain as day, that these two are in conflict. What am I going to do? Well, I know my religion's right, so I'm just going to put it down. I'm going to work on the science, because it's got to be the science that's wrong. That always, 100% of the time, always ends up badly. And the reason is because scientists don't give a hoot what you believe. They don't give a hoot what I believe. They're just going to follow the data. And when you fight that, end up almost always looking silly. It doesn't mean that the religion's wrong. But when you just put the religion down and say, no, there's nothing wrong with the way I'm looking at religion. It's got to be the way that these nasty, evil scientists are doing their work. That always fails. It has always failed in the past. This is the reason why you have young earth creation, quote, scientists coming out of answers in Genesis that make nonsense. It's the same reason why you have intelligent design coming out of the Discovery Institute. There's something wrong with the science that conflicts with my religion. Fix the blasted science. It never works. And that's the problem. And this leads sometimes to, I went to college and learned about evolution. This is causing friction. Right? And it doesn't need to. Especially doesn't need to if you understand some basics at least of New Church theology, and I'll get to that in the end. Right? But I got to go through these little bits of ugly things first. All right, here's this. So in the 21st century, here's two things that really bug some Christian people as opposed to evolution. And these are two statements that are absolutely scientifically true on their face. There's nothing wrong with this scientifically, and yet it bugs a lot of people. The first is humans and animals descended from a common ancestor. The second one is evolution is how life works, and the general mechanism is random mutation followed by natural selection. Right? That's the basics of evolutionary theory. It's been chugged around to do all kinds of other things, but this is bugs everyone. Right? Now, I've actually heard, here's another set of, you'll notice again, these are in quotes. These are actual words that have come out of many, many people's mouths, people that I have a lot of respect for. These folks are not biblical literalists. They're not off the deep end with, craziness. They're people I respect very highly, and yet they're saying these kinds of things. You don't really believe we came from the apes, do you? No. I believe we came from common ancestor, but yeah, I do believe we came from common ancestors because there's all kinds of data for it, and I'm going to show you that in a minute. Everybody acknowledges microevolution, but there's no evidence for macroevolution. What's that? Well, microevolution is like change in a species over time. Macroevolution is a species changing into another species. That's what people have problems with. And yeah, there is evidence for that. And yeah, I am going to show it to you. All right? So, put up. Here it is. So, what's the evidence? Is there paleontology evidence? Yeah, probably, but I'm not a paleontologist. I don't know anything about paleontology, so I'm not going to talk about it. Is there zoological evidence? Probably, but I don't know anything about zoology either, so I'm not going to talk about it. Botany. Darwin was a botanist. You must be talking about that? No. No, I don't know anything about botany. Geology and cosmology. I love Nature Nova series on PBS, but I don't know that stuff. But genetics, yeah. I know something about genetics. In drug discovery, if you're going to attack a disease state, there's three vectors you need to know about. There's the environmental vector, there's the viral vector, and there's the genetic vector. Each one of these may or may not play into your disease, and one might be important or almost unimportant, whatever, but they all play, and if you are not paying attention, you get burned every time. So you have to pay attention to the genetics. I'm not a geneticist, I'm a chemist, but I have a little vague idea of what's going on with genetics, and that's what I'm going to show you. Right? Now, I know this is not a science class, and I'm not going to, try and teach you all kinds of biology here, but I need everybody on the same page before I show you the actual data. So I need to take a little sidestep into the cell, and I'm going to show you just a couple of things at 40,000 feet. There's no test or anything. Don't worry about it. But I need to explain a few processes so you can understand why the data means what it means. Okay? So here we have it. This is the basic gene-to-protein mechanism. Now, everybody's heard about DNA, right? It's just this double-stranded helix, 4 bases, A, T, C, and G, right? And all wound up. And the DNA that stretches if you stretch it from one end to the other, that's called the genome. So when you take the entire DNA sequence from one end to the other, that's the genome. It's about 3 billion base pairs long, right? A very small portion of that is genetic material. So only about 2% of your genome is genetic. The other 98% is not genetic. It's not useless, it's just not genes. Only 2% is genes. So how does this thing work? So a gene records all the information necessary to make a protein, and the whole system runs on proteins. Right, so somebody screams and yells, I need protein X and I need it now. So what's it do? It gets this little machine called the RNA polymerase, and it goes and scans along the DNA, and it looks for the proper address where the particular gene is located. It finds it, and it starts to unwind the DNA. And then it starts recording what it finds there. And that's what this little red thing here is called the pre-messenger RNA. And each one of those little prongs is meant to represent an individual base. You put 3 bases together, and that records for a single amino acid. You have 3, then 3, then 3, then 3, and there's no spaces in between them. So it's not like reading a word where you have a word and a space and a word and a space. It's just 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3. So, and it gets to the end, and there's this little three-letter script that says stop. That's called stop codon. And that basically says this is, sort of like the amen. This is the end of this sequence. The system sees that, stops recording, lets the DNA wind back up, and now you have a perfect image of your gene written backwards through this messenger RNA. That process is called transcription. You're transcribing the information from the DNA onto the messenger RNA. Then this little thing moves off to this machine called the ribosome. The ribosome reads the strip of information and exudes out the back end the amino acid sequence that produces your protein. It gets to the stop codon, says, okay, that's the end of your protein, winds it all up, voila, protein. That's basically how it works. And that's really 40,000-foot view. I skipped a lot. But at a general idea, that's what's going on. All right? Once in a very long while, you make a boo-boo. Once in a long while, you run this transcription, and instead of the messenger RNA going to the ribosome, it inserts itself right back into the DNA. That process is called reverse transcription. So once in a while, you make a boo-boo, the gene records a copy of the gene back into the genome, right? What's the consequence of that? Well, let's think about that. Put the gene, now you got 2 copies of the gene, but only one of them is actually functional to be genetic in the same sense that the original one was, because you're missing your address. There's no way. How are you going to find it? It's like putting a book back in the library in the wrong place. It's like, okay, it's still there, but it's not usable anymore because it's not in the right position. So that book is it's effectively lost. Although it could be used for something else. There's no, it doesn't mean it's become useless. It just means it cannot anymore be used for its original purpose. In that sense, it's a relic. That relic is called, this is important, a pseudogene. A pseudogene is something that was, it was a gene that got inserted back in. So it's not functional as a gene. It could do something else, who knows. But that's from reverse transcription. All right, so now you know what a pseudogene is. I need to talk a little bit about mutations. So if you have a random mutation, there's 3 types of point mutations you can make. If these little prongs, these little red prongs, you can either, if you're going to mess something up, you can either add a base, you can subtract a base, or you can change a base. If you add or subtract a base, that's called a frame shift. You have these 3 letters in a row with no spaces in between them. If you pull one out, you rearranged everything. All of a sudden, the sequence is all messed up. You don't know where it starts. You don't know where it stops. You've created gibberish. That's called a frame shift. If you have that, that's sudden death, because now you can't make the protein that the cell needs in order to survive. So all of those types of mutations end in sudden death. The only possible way you can survive one of these is if you have a swap. If you take out one base and put in another. Now you've only changed one amino acid in your protein sequence. Is that deadly? Is it useful? Who knows? But that's the only way you can get away with this. And it doesn't happen very often. Mostly, genetic changes like this lead to sudden death. What happens if you add, subtract, or replace one of these bases in a pseudogene? Well, it's not actually making protein anymore. It's a relic. So what's going to happen? Nothing. It's just going to change. That's all. Okay, so if it turns out, and it does turn out, if you have a relatively constant number of mutations per generation, then you can tell by looking at a pseudogene about how long it's been around. Because if there's only just a few mutations in your pseudogene sequence, that means it didn't happen very long ago. And if you have a lot of mutations, it means it's because it's been around for a while. It's just like an old relic. Old relics get dirty as they live longer and longer, right? If you got a nice clean relic, it's pretty new. And that's basically a way of determining how old these mutations are. That process is called a molecular clock. That was discovered back in the 1960s, right? Using a molecular clock, you can figure out about how long things have been around, right? Those are the only two pieces of data that I actually need you to understand are what's a pseudogene, what's a molecular clock. That's all I needed, but I needed to tell you how to get there. This is real data. This is where it's coming from. So this is just one bit of data. This is from 2005. This is after the human genome was completely sequenced. And people started looking at these pseudogenes. And this is just a particular protein. You don't need to know what it's about. It's this thing called nanog. But these folks who were from Brigham Young, which is not an atheist institute, they started comparing pseudogene families between humans and chimps. And they're literally just comparing things. Okay, let's look at this and look at that and see what goes on here. And this is what they found. And I bet that's a tiny bit. But the first line there, this is the comparison. And I need to point out, this is all freely available. This is not hiding behind a paywall. You can go on Google and look up this very data. You can go up and do the sequencing yourself. The databases are online and free, so you could go back and process this whole thing yourself if you wanted to. But I'm just going to show you what they found. Right? So they found that the nanog gene itself was on, for humans, it was on chromosome 12. For chimps, it was on chromosome 12. That's not unusual. You'd expect, something that processes a particular cellular type protein. That would probably sort of kind of be in the same place for multiple species. What's that about? Well, that's fine, but let's look at the pseudogene. Pseudogene 1 is 12. 2 goes to 2b. There's actually a story that I don't have time for, but that's the same thing, really. 6 goes to 6, 7 goes to 7, 9 goes to 9, 10 goes to 10, 14 goes to 14. In humans, 50, the one on chromosome 15 is on chimps. And then the sex-linked X goes to X, and 6 goes to 6. So all of these relics are all in the same place for both species. Huh. What's that about? But it's going to get worse. You're laughing. It's going to get worse. Turns out, when you look at the molecular clock, they all showed up. Each one of those showed up at a different time, but comparing, 6 to 6, 9 to 9, all the individual ones showed up in two species at the same time. How's that possible? Well, you could say that God waved a magic wand and made it appear like these are all sort of together, and but that's a really complex idea. The simple explanation, and the one that all scientists use, and the one that kids learn when they learn about evolution. They don't see this, they see it in textbooks, it's taught didactically, but what is really obvious, you're just handing down the image from generation to generation to generation. That's all you're doing. You just keep handing it down. And as you hand it down, as things split, you just keep handing it down and handing it down. And they diverge, and you keep handing it down. And that's why you see the same image in both species at the same time in the same place. This is how 23andMe works. It's how Ancestry.com works. You're just looking at these patterns. There's only one difference between what Ancestry.com does and what these people did. Ancestry.com looks at an individual species. These guys look trans-species, looking across species. Oh, you can't do that. That's offensive. You can't look across species. That's not going to stop a scientist. Scientists just look at the data and follow wherever it goes. And it's real obvious what's going on. I'll tell you, the more you look at these kind of bits of data, the more and more obvious it becomes that, okay, so this is how it branched. We split from here, split from there, And by the way, this guy 15 down here, on the nanog pseudogene 8, I think it says. Okay, that turns out by the molecular clock to be far and away the youngest one. Ooh, that happened after we split. That's how it works. It's like really simple. And when you say, oh no, we can't have this, you get into trouble. That's why we have common ancestry. It's just looking at the data. I don't have time for any more of that one, so we'll go to the second statement. This also bugs people, and I get it. And this right here, this is where New Church theology really, really shines. This is what you guys ought to be arguing about. When somebody says, oh, evolution, we can't have evolution here. Here's the statement, and up on the board, I want you to read it with me, because it's important. What some religious, not all religious people, but some religious people will say, yeah, I agree with this. Yeah, it is right. Let's read it. Evolution is how life works, and the general mechanism is mutation, followed by natural selection. You can't do that. It is so, so important. It is really, really important. It's random. The molecular clock won't work if it's not a random selection. You have to have that mutation going across the board in no particular pattern, because if it's a particular pattern, you don't know how it's working. It all works on this concept of randomness. Now, does random mean there is no God? That's where people get bugged. And that brings me to this next slide. All right. Every good atheist is going to try and convince you that these 3 bullet points are pretty much the same thing. That chance and random are the same thing. But chance is somehow sort of kind of like without a cause. And it sort of means without a purpose. Right? Now, if there is no purpose in life, there is clearly no God. Right? You cannot have a God, but there's no purpose, right? So clearly, so if random means there's no purpose, then yes, there is no God, right? How are you going to get around that? And I agree with that. The problem is, I don't agree that these 3 bullet points are the same thing. Now, this is, again, where New Church theology comes in, right? So you take those 3 bullets and turn them upside down, what do you have? You have end, cause, and effect, right? Or I guess the new words, or I guess in the newest translations of Divine Love and Wisdom is what is it? Purpose, means, and result, something like that, right? Same idea, but that's just this upside down. That this is really novel New Church kind of idea. You don't find this anywhere else. You do find it here, right? And that's really, really, really important. I get it why Christian theologians would get confused and say, well, yeah, right, random is sort of like without purpose. Therefore, we can't have that because everybody gets without purpose equals no God. But that's not true here. Or it shouldn't be true here. I'm reminded of a story that I read when I was a young man. Right after I got out of high school, I started reading True Christian Religion. And there's this story. So Swedenborg's wandering around the spiritual world, and he run up against these people, and they're all bickering with each other, really nasty, right? And they're arguing about this idea of, what's the nature of influx? And there's a group that says, it's spiritual to natural, and there's another group saying it's natural to spiritual, and there's a third group saying this really bizarre idea, it's pre-established harmony, which is this idea that you have both at once. And that's bizarre. But these are people just going at it now. New Church 101, it's always spiritual and natural. Everybody knows this. You better know this, right? So they're arguing about this, and really nobody's willing to give an inch. So they finally decide, okay, fine, we're going to put all 3 answers in a hat. And we're going to pull one out. And the one we pull out, we're going to accept as the truth. And so they do it. What do you think comes out? Spiritual or natural, right? But then this angel appears out of nowhere, just in Deus Ex Machina format. Just says, it's just, you guys are idiots. Look, this is the only way that the truth could reveal itself to you. But don't think this happened by chance. It's a chance. It's spiritual, right? That's what it's about, right? You might argue that, okay, so that's a fine story, but we do not have angels on this plane of life popping in to tell us what to do. We just don't. right? But I would argue that we are actually in this condition every day. We just don't recognize it. I'll give you an example, a theoretical example. Imagine, I don't know, 20 kids, about 6th grade. 6th grade, they've started to learn about team sports, right? And they're in a small school, so like Bernathen Elementary School, right? So you got 20 kids, and so these kids have known each other since they were playing together in the sandbox. So they all know each other. And I'll guarantee you, one of the kids in this group is a jock. And there's another kid in the group that has 10 thumbs, right? And everybody knows who the jock is. And everybody knows who the 10-thumb man is. And everybody wants to be on the team with the jock, and nobody wants to be on the team with Mr. 10 Thumbs, right? So how are they going to drop sides? It doesn't seem quite fair that, so kids are actually pretty smart. You say, okay, maybe we'll play a game of rock, paper, scissors first. A game of pure chance. And then whoever wins that game either gets to choose first or has to choose second, whatever. They'll use that chance to guide who goes first. Oh, these children, they're devil worship. They're worshiping chance. No, what are they doing? They're really struggling at this really complex idea called fairness. You put 100 people in a room, you say, define fairness. You're going to get like 100 different answers, most of them conflicting with the other 99. Why? It's because fairness is a really complex idea. It's not a simple idea. It's really profound, too. But if we all think we know, we have a definition for ourselves, and we think, well, what we do is fair, but it's not true across the board. It's really difficult. And here are these children, grasping at a really, really complex idea. So what they're doing looks like this. And here he is, purpose means result. This is New Church theology. What's the purpose of this? Fairness. What's the means? Rock, paper, scissors. What was the result? Chance. Oh, purpose equals chance. No, purpose is like, it's end cause effect. It's just like Father, Son, Holy Spirit, or charity, faith, good works, or, celestial, spiritual, natural. They're all the same thing. It's one within the other or leading to the other. But no, purpose is not result. But the purpose and the means are in the result. And this is basic New Church theology if you just bother to read Divine Love and Wisdom. Nobody else has ever heard of this. Nobody. You don't find this in Catholicism. You don't find it in evangelicalism. You don't find it in mainline Protestantism. But it should be here, all over the place. And this just simply, very simply explains how you have chance and you still have a designer. That's really what I had to say. That's really all I have time for. But I want to leave you with this. There's a lot of things that the people in this room and maybe the people listening online have to offer science. It's not by changing the science. That's never going to work. What the people in this room and people online have to offer is this window into New Church theology as it applies to the science that everybody understands is real science. Right? The bottom line is, for these folks that are the nuns, it's this. Statement on the right is a non sequitur on first principles, but it's still an issue. This issue needs to be fixed. It's not okay to just say, okay, well, we'll just ignore it. That's fine. We'll just go on to some other subject. No, people are leaving organized religion, and that's one of the main things they're saying. I went to college, and I learned about evolution. That's not okay. It is a non sequitur that is passing as my issue of why I'm leaving religion. Not okay. So I would posit this. Fixing the statement on the right-hand side of this image is necessary, but it is not in and of itself sufficient to fix the plot on the left. That's really all I had to say. Thanks. He's got.
We have about 7 minutes for question and answer, so if you wait and Okay. We're on? Yeah.
Yes.
I have one really silly question that I'll let you ponder. Some years ago, I did the 23andMe thing.
Yes.
And, then I did my DNA and everything, and then I started to get responses from the computer, I'm your fifth cousin and so forth, and let's connect and all this kind of stuff. So my question for you to think about, and you don't have to answer it right now, is, okay, so I go to my friendly neighborhood chimpanzee next door, and I do him. Is he going to get fifth cousins coming out of the computer also?
From you? You mean your fifth cousin?
Yeah, well, any fifth cousins.
Yeah, from another chimp, yeah.
Oh.
But not from you. Okay. No, you're way, way too far away. You're like 5 billionth.
Okay, so, all right. Now, the somewhat more serious question, going to, I'm kind of inferring from what you're saying is that if we can convince people intellectually that that there's a problem with that statement, as you've spent a fair bit of time telling us, and show them the truth, so-called, that's going to sort of fix the situation and of having people just leave church. I think I could argue that people often use that kind of statement, incorrect as it is and anti-intellectual as it is, as just kind of a reason. Okay, this is it. I'm really a little too lazy, or I don't care, or I mean that the reason is more a kind of a non-intellectual reason. It's really just kind of an emotional thing. And so it seems to me that if you really want to get people back in churches, that there has to be more than the intellectual approach. People don't seem to be really convinced by intellectual things anymore. That's just getting worse and worse as far as I can tell.
Oh, I'd agree with that. Oh, absolutely. I agree with everything you said. No, I'm not, well, maybe it came across that way, but I wasn't trying to argue that changing this statement would change everything, or even very much. I'm only arguing that you can't get there before you change this. This is like the first step. But you're right, it's much more about what's going on in the heart than in the head.
Yeah.
It's absolutely true.
Great talk. Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. I love that. I was thinking, though, that we need to work at this in several different directions. I think there's just some fundamental flaws in traditional Christian doctrine that people can hardly recognize, and yet it leads to, the hypocrisy and all the other things that are leading to none. So this thinking about, I love the idea that you're planning to work on this direction. I also sense that there's some, I couldn't find it, but I have the sense that there's a passage that refers to an early Christian heretic, Arius. There's the suggestion, he's going to win, partially because of the flaws of traditional Christian doctrine, so that people aren't going to believe.
Right.
So we need to work at this a bunch of different directions. Godspeed on your efforts. Thank you.
I had this question, but I think you touched on it. People that I've talked to that don't go to any organized churches anymore, for the most part, say because they're more interested in spirituality than religion. And to me, that's a real answer.
Oh yeah.
And I even once went to a talk at a synagogue, and the rabbi was really going on about how people weren't interested in the organized Jewish religion as much as they were in spirituality. But he didn't seem to comprehend what was meant.
Right. No. As that one table I showed you was, there are multiple reasons why people are leaving, and the science/evolution part was only 37%. Something like that, which means over 60% had nothing to do with this. The number that I took was just the largest of all the selections. So there's a huge amount of issues going on simultaneously. I'm only qualified to speak about the science. I'm a scientist. You're right. There's all kinds of other stuff going on that has nothing to do with science.
Thank you. I enjoyed the whole talk. I'm particularly interested in that red word, that the random mutation.
Yes.
And you had an explanation, and you've got somehow there's purpose behind it at the top level and comes down. But one thing I was toying about, what happens if you replace the word random with stochastic, where it looks like it's a statistical thing, but it's not taking a position about where it comes from.
Right. There's this guy, Ars Lewis, I think his name is. Some guy, I think he's from MIT, makes exactly that suggestion. He works beyond just being some sort of scientist at MIT. Works at this organization called BioLogos, and that was one of his arguments. Is sort of like, is getting away from this purposelessness idea. At some level, I think that's sort of avoiding the issue, because no self-respecting atheist is going to let you get away with that. They're going to want to bring it right back to, no, we're talking about chance. And I think, personally, you are holding all the cards, because you're holding divine love and wisdom. And that's something that other people really just, I can't tell you how novel that is. I've never heard anything even remotely close to that. Just that one book. I mean, there's other things that are also truly novel. But this business of science and religion don't conflict? No, that's generic. And trying to get around these issues, that's also generic, because there is a lot of issues, especially between standard Christian orthodoxy and modern science. There's a lot of them. And I don't know really how to help that very much without talking about this.
Just a clarification. Stochastic, from a mathematician's point of view, just means it's probabilistic in time.
Right.
So it's kind of the same thing.
I'm not saying it's not the same thing. I'm saying is that any reasonable atheist is going to say, no, I see you trying to hide it behind fancy language, and I'm going to tell the general populace, you're just hiding it because it's really chance, which is sort of kind of what, I mean, you're right. It's just it's a fancier name for chance is really what it is. You're right. And to a scientist, there are gradations of what this means. That's true, but that's going to be completely beyond the basic scope of the general populace. You're just not going to get there with that. It's just too technical, I think.
I think there's time for one more question.
Here it comes.
I don't think I can really deal with it, but I ponder the social sciences and all the disorders. Pardon me? I ponder the sociological and cultural disorders and all the false narratives that pervade our nation's culture and the Western world generally. And I often think that it's a failure of the priesthood not to relate doctrine to these issues. And I wonder if that could be done, if it was done, it would have a big effect on how people think about hard science also. He said, that's not your bag.
No, ask the theologians in the room. There's quite a few of them. Yeah.
But I can't get into details.
Okay. Thank you very much, Justin.
Thank you.